Chapter 2. It became a habit on Sundays for Imogen to come over early, work with Fortune while supervised, and then have brunch afterward. Gabe never seemed to mind the teaching or the cooking, luckily. After all, it was basically the best date ever. They didn't see each other much during the week, so it was a special routine and way for them to connect over their favorite things: horses and food. Imogen dragged her cold body into the house, heading for the expansive kitchen and promptly falling, limply, into a tall chair at the island with a sigh. The kitchen had quickly become her favorite room. His house was built with an open floor plan, rustic and perfectly suited to the surrounding woods, with reclaimed wooden beams and floor-to-ceiling windows, accentuating the view of the mountain and the paddocks. If her aunt's home was a cabin, this was a lodge. But the kitchen was a chef's dream. Stainless steel appliances, a Viking stove, and a huge island where Imogen could sit and drool over the smells that were being cooked for her. Yum. Gabe was ready for her with a huge mug of coffee. Could life be any more perfect? Imogen grinned at the man. "You're a god, an angel, a true gift." Gabe shook his head. "I know what my girl likes." While she was primarily a tea drinker, since spending more time outdoors and with his propensity toward high-end beans and a slow drip, she was gradually expanding her horizons. Imogen, for her sake, was just glad for something hot. She was not used to the level of cold they were experiencing. Yes, it got cold on the seashore, but this was nothing like the wind coming off the ocean. She felt the chill in her bones. It had seeped through the ground, into her feet, and up her body. She took a big sip, sighed in bliss, and then rested her chin on her hands as she gazed at him. He really did know what she liked, she thought in wonder, as he moved deftly around the large, well-used space in a cute little apron that read, "The secret ingredient is dog hair." It was so silly, but she loved it. She'd given it to him from her dog, Cookie, for Christmas. Imogen sighed dramatically and put a hand to her heart. "Have I told you how much I love that you like to cook?" "It's a good thing I do, because otherwise I'd never eat." He deadpanned, looking at her while he grabbed his oven mitts. Imogen rolled her eyes. "Yes, the bachelor life. I thought most men would learn spaghetti and meatballs or grilled cheese and tomato soup, but you blow them out of the water." Those were about all she could make, without embarrassing herself anyway. Did she imagine it, or was that red creeping up his ears? Gabe turned toward the oven and bent down to remove a pan that had been warming while they were working outside. He looked so cute when he was domestic. Gabe cleared his throat, and not meeting her eyes, noted, "It's just food. My parents taught Harp and me to cook at a young age. It helps me relax." "You and your sister definitely put your lessons to good use. She's a queen in the kitchen. I bet she was a star in culinary school, too." Imogen said the words before regretting it immediately. She winced visibly at her lack of filter. Imogen knew that Harper's return to Vermont after their parents' tragic death was a sore spot for Gabe. He'd been on tour in Afghanistan when the drunk driver had run them off the road, along with their friend Bailey's parents, who were in the car with them on their way home from a party. While he applied for honorable discharge as soon as he heard, the red tape took almost a year before he could come home permanently. Gabe had come for the funeral, but he hadn't been able to move home until his discharge was finalized. His sister, who was at the same time going through a contentious divorce, handled all the details for the funeral and the estate alone. Harper had left culinary school and her terrible marriage to remain in the valley, close to her childhood memories and her brother when he returned. Gabe had never forgiven himself for his sister having to leave her dreams of being a pastry chef at a Michelin-rated restaurant behind. His grief and depression had driven him deeper into drinking than he cared to admit. But he was grateful to have his sister in his life. Gabe didn't react to her careless reminder, apart from a slight tensing of his shoulders before he continued to make their plates. She felt like a monster. It was only 2 weeks ago that he'd confessed his feelings about the situation during the anniversary of their death. The holidays were hard on him, and their new relationship had hit a rocky point they were still bouncing back from. Imogen was so mad at her lack of filter. Her mouth tended to get her in trouble. Awkwardly, she kept talking in the hopes they could move on from her gaffe. Plus, you have such a stressful job. I think it's great you have some way to decompress from petting animals all day. She grinned impishly. And it's pretty great that I can reap the benefits. After all, you need a taste tester. Gabe smiled at her like she wanted, but there was a line around his eyes. She'd gotten pretty good at reading his face and its micro-expressions. He was a man of few words, so it had become a necessity for her. Yes, absolutely. Petting animals is the primary job for a veterinarian. It's widely known. Gabe served her samples from everything. The French toast bake and egg strata were piled high. For all her small size, she could put away as much as him. Gabe had learned the hard way one night when she was still hungry and finished his meal when he left the table to top off her wine. Gabe grinned fully. He loved watching her eat. She did everything with passion. I hope you're hungry because I made a lot of food. I'm trying out something new. She pointed the fork she was holding and scrunched her face at him. This fresh air has been great for my lungs, but terrible for my metabolism. He snorted. They both knew her metabolism was just fine. She was like the Energizer Bunny, always moving even when she was supposed to be sitting still. Imogen had a great appetite, and he loved to cook, so it was a match made in heaven. That is, if she decided to stay in Vermont like she'd promised. Imogen had officially been here since September. 4 months had passed by quickly. Now that her aunt had fully recovered from her injury last fall, Imogen had started to make plans to find a place of her own in town. It hadn't happened yet, which made him wonder if she was serious about moving. Gabe shook off the dark thoughts. He didn't want to doubt her. She'd clearly chosen him and their budding relationship at Christmas, despite her mother's pressure to return with her to New Jersey. Helen Gray was formidable. He'd never met a grown woman who looked so polished and chic on the outside, yet be so ugly on the inside. He'd wanted to laugh when the woman threw an actual temper tantrum at the holiday party. Out of respect and sympathy for his girlfriend, though, he'd held silent. This was Imogen's battle to fight, but he'd be there to back her up if necessary. Gabe had no excuse for the dark thoughts about her family. He hadn't been sleeping well recently, but it was no excuse. He should be used to it by now. Every winter, the shortened days only added to his overall gloom. Now, the nightmares were back. My sister is better at baking, but I thought I would try something new and see if you liked them. Imogen dug in greedily. You know I love being a guinea pig. I'll try anything you make. You just love me for my food. Gabe laughed as he watched her take a second, generous portion. She couldn't respond to deny it with her mouth full like a chipmunk. She crossed her eyes at him, making a silly face, and he chuckled. Imogen was playful, had a great sense of humor, and a lust for life that was evident in the way she did everything, from eating to spending time with friends, and of course, her devotion to her dog, Cookie, and horse, Fortune. Gabe felt lucky to be part of that grouping. Watching her and her horse get to know each other better was incredible. There was a bond there, a recognition of each other that was visible whenever they were together. The time they spent together, either working on their communication skills or spending quality time in the paddock, was different than anything else he'd experienced. Gabe was very close with his horses, but Imogen and Fortune had almost recognized each other from the start. Gabe was impressed with the deepening connection between Imogen and Fortune, but he wasn't surprised. Imogen definitely had a way of making others feel seen. People and animals gravitated toward her. She was like the sun, and everyone wanted to bask in her warmth. If he hadn't already developed feelings for her, he'd be head over heels watching her and her horse build their bond. He really hoped, for both their sakes, that she stayed and followed through with her plans this time. Her horse wouldn't be the only broken heart left behind. Imogen took another sip from her coffee and rubbed her belly. You know, Gabe, I'm getting a little spoiled here. If we ever gave up our Sundays, I think I would cry. I spend all week looking forward to my Sundays with you, Jersey. Gabe was open about his feelings. Honestly, it's been a nice interruption to my quiet little routine. You and your routines. Imogen smiled, showing she was just teasing. So, if I wasn't here, what would you be doing? Gabe pretended to think, resting a finger on his chin. Probably having a wild party. You know how much I love crowds. Yes, you're one of the party people. She laughed wryly. If there was anyone who was prone to hermit status, it was Gabe. No wonder he and her aunt had bonded. They both preferred their own company. No, seriously, what is your idea of a perfect Sunday? He didn't have to think about it for a minute. I'd wake up early, feed the horses, and do chores, then probably take either Rowdy or Dexter on a ride through the woods. Afterward, I'd come home and hole up with a book by the fireplace. That sounded just like him, and she reached out a hand to hold his, turning serious. Am I messing with your routine too much, Gabe? Jersey. He started to interrupt, but she raised her other hand to silence him. Be honest with me. We promised that, right? You won't hurt my feelings. I've had the same routine for years, Jersey. I'm a creature of habit, so yes, I love knowing what to expect. But I won't say it hasn't been nice to shake things up a little bit and do something different. I love spending time with you. Imogen missed him a lot during the week. Sundays were the only days she could count on seeing him at this point. Still, if he needed to decompress and have time to himself on his day off, then she would understand. She would take a week off working with Fortune and go see her friends instead. Fortune was a former show jumper. Despite having been wrapped in bubble wrap for most of his life, he was acclimating nicely to a more rustic setting. Ever so slowly, the light was returning to his eyes, and he would show glimpses of the very goofy personality he'd kept hidden. It was partially the change of pace, Imogen was sure. She was focused on building trust and giving him time off to learn to be a horse for a while. Winter in the mountains wasn't always ideal for riding, with ice and hard ground anyway. I look forward to our Sunday dates, Gabe insisted. Spending time with you is the highlight of my week. I know it's not easy with my work schedule, but maybe next week we can go for a trail ride together if weather permits. Imogen nodded enthusiastically. I'd love that, but I think maybe afterward I'll go back to Joe's and let you read in quiet. No, Gabe insisted. I can read any night after work. I'm starting a new routine, with you. Maybe after we eat, you can hang out for a bit, and we can spend time in front of the fire together. Imogen blushed at the intensity of Gabe's stare, his eyes dropping to her mouth. She bit her lip and grinned. The promise of a day spent together with the horses in the forest, and a romantic interlude in front of the fire, that sounded pretty perfect to her. It's a date,